everybody. I have a special guest today. I'm so excited. Thank you for joining me. This is Michelle Emmanuel. Tell us something about you, Michelle.
Well, thank you, first of all, for having me. I'm really happy to be
Yes,
here and chat with you
absolutely.
today. Let's see. So, I am a wellness coach, a consultant, educator, and I made my way to this place. Is a very circuitous route, but basically, it really started launching in 2020 when everything was sort of the perfect storm. And
Yes.
just started realizing, like, oh, not only am I in need of some of these offerings, but I imagine so many other people are as well. And so
Right.
that has led me to ultimately doing what I'm doing right now with the empowering resilience, which is basically supporting people in burnout recovery.
Oh, I love that. I love the word recovery. I'm a doc, so
Oh,
I'm like,
okay.
yes,
Speaking
let's
your
get into
language.
recovery. Like this is my language. But even prevention would be even better, right? Like that's how we like to like back
Ideally.
it up. And so yeah, thank you for your impactful work. This is important stuff these
My
days.
pleasure.
And I love how you mentioned, during 2020, we needed it as well
Mm,
for ourselves, right? Like you said, like you were looking for resources. I same thing was looking for resources for myself, my family members, my good friends. And so,
mm.
so that's why I also landed in this space because I'm like, whoa, we need some new tools, right?
No doubt.
How would you, if someone is not familiar with burnout, like how would you define it if you had to just
Hmm.
come up with your definition, or what definition do you use to help people understand what it is?
Yeah, typically I call it low capacity.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is low energy, consistent exhaustion, not able to really feel like they're able to bounce back. The resilience is very low, and that can be emotionally, mentally, physically, and it shows up in a lot of different ways. Ultimately, though, it really, really impacts the health. And so that it starts as just feeling like a lot of emotional, mental fatigue, physical fatigue, and so I wrap all of that up into saying low capacity.
That's makes it understandable though. I like the way that you say that. And
Thank
I
you.
recently heard a neuroscience researcher talk about, like the brain is always busy, like it manages our whole body, so
Yes.
it's doing so much. And so if we ask it to do additional things like work is busy or home life is busy, then we need to give it even more support. And
Yeah.
I love that because when people say like, I'm exhausted, I'm this, I'm like, well, what
Right.
are you doing for your amazing, beautiful brain? That's how I look at things. I always
I
look through a
love
lens
that.
of like, what are you doing for it? So
Mm,
I'm also a gardener, and I think same thing with the garden. Like I read this one book where their family line was Native Americans, and they said
mm.
like their grandmother taught them like don't put anything in the ground without giving something to the ground.
Yes, love it.
So like you can't expect something to grow if you don't give it something. Like you can't
Hmm.
expect something from that garden unless you're feeding it. I think like same thing for the brain, right? Like
Absolutely.
you can't ask people to be active at work if you don't give your brain and your body what it needs. Yeah. So how do you put those two together for people when they're feeling so, like their capacity is low?
Mm.
How do you bring that to their at least, so that they understand a little bit and maybe could take one step forward?
What I start with is helping people to understand like the awareness of that, and it's like, how do you know you're exhausted? Where are you feeling that? What's telling you that you're
Mhm.
exhausted? Instead of just like, oh, I'm just so tired, I'm so drained, and just creating that
Mhm.
awareness. And because I'm also a somatic practitioner, which basically means that I work with the body, I help people to recognize that true transformation has to be embodied because our lived experiences live in our body, which is absolutely a mind body connection. And I love that you're a neuroscientist,
Mhm.
that's your gig, because
Mhm.
I would nerd out on the brain. I love that. Before
Love
I was
it.
even a wellness coach, I would watch
Mhm.
documentaries on,
Right?
neuroscience. I thought it was so fascinating.
It
And
is.
so I start by helping people to understand how their body works, how their brain works. I feel a little intimidated saying that to you, but
Ah!
I'm talking high level.
I'm all for brain wonder, like I'm all
Yeah,
for it. Yeah.
absolutely.
Just share the word, right?
Right,
And
right.
why does it matter to you? What have you seen it done to folks, like, when they're in that low capacity?
Yeah, really, like I said, it's a direct health impact. So
Mhm.
physical health. I mean, it can. Some people are hospitalized. There was one person I was coaching that there's weight loss. It impacts not only the mental state, the emotional state, relationships, performance at work, performance in the family or
Mhm.
partnership or just life. It's
Mhm.
very pervasive. And so it can be something that seems like, oh, most people think I'll just take a break, I'll just go on vacation. But what happens is, unless there are sustainable practices associated with that recovery process, once they come back from their vacation or that pause, they go right
Mhm.
back to the same patterns. And so what I do is I support people in actually creating some practices and patterns that are actually going to support them and help them prevent going back into that, or at least again back to that awareness. Like when they're recognizing that stress and that cringe part in their chest, and like they're really starting to get all that tension in their body, like having some practices around that are going to help them to basically keep that whole burnout from happening. I call it like a teapot, and the water gets boiling, 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 and burnout is just like this constant, sound.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
the practice is like keeping the temperature at a level that, when you start recognizing when it's starting to go up before it gets to that steaming point.
I love that. Yeah. Yeah. I just read an interesting book called Upstream.
Mm.
And he was talking about like going back. So if you see somebody really suffering, like go work backwards, like what could have been done earlier? What could have been done
Mhm.
earlier? How could we completely just avoid the problem? And if you think like what's in the workplace, maybe that could be changed, like one or two things that you in a perfect
Oh,
world that
the
you
perfect
would
word.
see in a workplace that we maybe could take some of those steps backwards so we don't have to talk about burnout so much. Like
Mhm.
what do you think is needed at this time?
That's a big one because, so
Hmm.
much of our culture is about performance and,
Hmm.
and that high intensity and everything. So part of it is just the culture.
Hmm.
What I suggest, what I do a workshop just for leaders, and what I recommend with them is always accompany expectations with support. And so, for example, if there's like a high intensity project that you're working on and people get it done, what happens is it's a lot of leaders recognize like, oh, they can perform at that high stress level, so we're just going to keep that temperature turned up high all
Hmm.
the time, when really that was like because the project needed to be done. And so once the project is done, how do you actually turn the temperature back down, without reducing performance and expectations, but at the same time, what's the support that's included in that? And a lot of times in organizations, this is a question I really ask the leaders that maybe their staff won't ask them. So it's like, why is it urgent? Why is it ASAP? Why is it time sensitive? And if there's not a really good reason for that, then maybe
Hmm.
changing language around that, 'cause sometimes it really is. But sometimes
Hmm.
the norm is just like, I need this ASAP. This is high level. This is super important. Everything. And what happens is our nervous system responds to that. It's like, oh, that sense of urgency, it goes directly into the nervous system. So I talk to leaders a lot about languaging and again supporting the expectations. For example, making mental health part of the norm. And what do you need? Not just, okay, here's this and this, but really listening, like, what does that look like? Support, and how can we
Hmm.
accommodate that? And also making it more, this is something I hear a lot just when I'm coaching individuals, particularly, and I coach individuals who typically are in a corporate world. And the big um, I guess term that I hear all the time is there's no time. I have no time for this,
Hmm.
and I understand that, when stress is
Hmm.
happening, it feels like I can't squeeze anything else into my day. And so what
Hmm.
I tell people is it's like, it's not about adding, it's about incorporating something. And
Hmm.
so what I talk about is like I call it the SAS, something that's very simple, it's accessible, and it's sustainable. And so, and I talk about simply like an easy access point is breath, and
Hmm.
as a doctor, that's like something that can really regulate our nervous system very quickly,
Hmm.
very easily, and it's
Hmm.
accessible, so rather
Hmm.
than
Yeah.
taking, 3 months off,
Mhm.
it's like, talking like we were talking about, like what's the first indicator, and that a lot of
Mhm.
times is. And so I lead people in like 60 seconds, 30 seconds, and that's, we do a before and after because I love to have
Right,
people create
right.
their own
Yeah,
data,
right.
so when I'm doing
Love it.
workshops in particular, we do a
So
check-in,
funny.
like, how are you
Using that.
feeling right now? And they write it down. And then we do like
Mhm.
30 seconds or 60 seconds. And then we write down again, how are you feeling now? And then I have them do a compare and contrast. And it's like, and guess what? You have time. That was 60 seconds. That was 30 seconds. There's time.
That's great.
So
I love
just
it.
kind of creating some access points that are really simple, it's accessible, and it's sustainable. You don't have to go
Yeah.
anywhere. You can actually between or in a Zoom meeting. I teach them different techniques to just ground themselves, center themselves. Again, it's just that awareness in our bodies, because we embody our lived experience. And so when stress happens, it's important to have that awareness of when it's happening and how it's actually happening in a person's body.
Right. Yeah. And the consequences, right? Like you said, in a busy
Huge.
day and those Zooms, some people are on Zooms just constantly all day long. So you're
Yes.
right. Just giving them the simple tools they could just use even while they're in, no one would even know, right? Like no one knows you're doing it. You could look the same and you could be like doing all
Exactly.
this internal work, right? I love that.
Exactly. I mean, I'm
That's
practicing it
amazing.
right now, just a simple form of
Right?
like, grounding my feet on the ground. That's
Yeah.
helping me to feel really balanced and settled in my seat, and just noticing
Yeah.
like, that's helping me to like calm down. So if a person's in a meeting with someone and they're feeling tension, it's like, okay, how can they just recognize what's happening in their body right now, and where can they relax? And
Amazing.
it's still looking
Yeah.
the same,
I
people
know.
look in the face and
Still
no one's
sitting
knowing
there.
what's going on.
That is really neat. Yeah. Cause a lot of times people do think, oh, I'm going to practice that mindfulness thing that everybody's talking about. And it's like
Mm,
other, not in your workday. But I agree, the
right.
more we can, weave that throughout the day was to
Absolutely.
activate our parasympathetic system. Like that's our calm side.
Absolutely.
It actually will make people more creative and to come up with solutions in
It
those meetings
does.
more so, right? Yeah. They're not
It
like
does.
nervous, like you said, like, because
Mhm.
that's not our good thinking time when we're so nervous or, when we have that high sympathetic load, like that's our like, is everything okay? I don't think so. I better get out of here, like that's
Exactly,
wonderful.
exactly.
So Michelle, how can people find you if they want to work with you?
Well, they can find me on my website. That's called sustainablechangemaker.com.
Okay.
On there, on the website, there's also my email information. They can email and ask any questions they want. What I do on the website talks about the workshops that I offer. And what I do in the workshops is Dr. Saunder Dawson Smith, this is where I got this from her, and she's also a doctor. And she was noticing that her patients weren't getting better. And she actually started doing a study and found that there's more than one type of burnout. There are at least 7 she identified. I actually added number 8. Um, and I just talk about, again, the awareness, starting with the recognition, and that's laid out on the website in terms of like the different types of workshops that focus on that, and
Wonderful.
also individual coaching, group coaching, and all of
Wonderful.
that can be found on my website.
Oh my gosh, so many tools. And you already shared a lot for us. So when you're in a meeting, you could have your feet down, you said, because then you feel grounded and you don't
Absolutely.
not like tapping your foot, like, just feel like,
Tapping, if it's going to
oh,
work, sometimes, if particularly on Zoom, no one's going to ask you to stop jiggling the table,
yeah, yeah,
but it's important to find accessible tools that are going to
that work for
actually
you.
regulate
Mhm.
one's nervous system. And so that's a prevention tool, basically.
Yes, I love
But
it.
there's so much more to it, as far as
There
the
is.
recovery process. And that's where, when I talk to organizations and individuals, I tell them like, this is a great start in terms of this workshop. But what happens is true change happens with accountability and support. So,
Mhm.
especially when leaders, provide a workshop for their employees and like, are you better? Okay,
I know,
let's
I
go.
know. Like we good?
Like
Like
start
once a year?
your
Like
meeting. Yeah. And it's like, well, what happens now is there needs to be something that's again integrated into some kind of support and accountability, which that's what I offer in terms of like the ongoing support, so that the culture does slowly change and everyone has the same language, same expectations. And
Mhm.
when people are put first, organizations thrive, period.
Right. That is so true. Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think neuroscience wise, like we just like to feel like we belong, right? That someone actually cares
Absolutely.
for us. And
Right.
I have a client who's leaving a position and she's been there a couple of years. She's having a hard time. She's leaving for a great reason and she's excited, but she's still,
Okay.
I said, yes, it's hard because you wanted to belong and you feel like you belong in that culture. Like that's what
Mhm.
everyone's after, right? So those team leads are probably, I want my people to feel like they belong because that's when they can flourish, right? I mean, they're not hopefully like
Absolutely.
suffering with burnout. They actually feel like the company cares when they
Right.
hire, people like you to walk them through like a workshop, like you said, but actually long-term solutions as well. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, thank you for
Absolutely.
your impactful work. It's important
Oh,
now,
thank you.
especially after all these years of very trying times, around our
Right.
globe. And people have been using all the tools that they know, but it's great to, that they have you, that they can work with you and get some new tools.
Yes.
So
Thank you so
thank you
much,
for all
Megan.
your hard work.
My
Stay at
pleasure.
it.
I will
Stay
do my
well.
best.
Yeah, that's right. Stay well. Thank
Thank
you.
you.